What drives human motivation? So a collective dialogue exploring varying perspectives and theories around what drives human motivation and how our needs and priorities in work and life have evolved in response to a dynamic and changing world. That's the question that we asked, and that was the intention for gathering people here today. So I wanted to just give a little bit of an introduction to human motivational needs. What do we mean by human motivational needs specifically? Well, if we define the two words, motivation, according to Maslow, Abraham Maslow, motivation is a person's attempt at fulfilling a need. And the need itself being something that creates a sort of internal pressure which influences a person's behavior. Does that sound familiar to people? Put your hands up and just give your fingers a wave, or just make some noise in the chat if you know what I mean when I say an internal pressure which influences a person's behavior. And so then a motivational need is that thing that we attempt to fulfill based on what's necessary and then also what's meaningful to us as well. And so why now? Good question. Why now? With all the chaos that's going on in the world at the moment, there's a lot of adjustments in people's lives in terms of their habits, their behaviors, the way that many of us might even identify, through our work or through social interactions and things, which have all been thrown into question recently. And in that space, there can often be a deeper questioning or an introspection into, how can we more deeply connect to our drive, our sense of meaning, our purpose, and our place in the world. So that was some of the motivation which kind of engaged us to put this event on. So I'm going to introduce a few models of human motivation. There's the now. So we're going to start with what's most common or most popular in that sphere. And then we're going to drop into the origins. And then we're going to have a little look into the future at some of the newer ideas that are emerging today. So Maslow's hierarchy. This is where we begin. Many of you might know this model already, and this is commonly used in personal development. It's used in organizational management and team culture and things like that. And essentially the basic premise is that we spend a lot of our energy and time fulfilling these bottom level needs. So physiological, safety, love and belonging. And then there is less energy and focus to spend on things like achieving one's full potential or even feeling a sense of accomplishment in life. So Maslow dropped this model in the 1940s, but it is still something that many people operate by or are aware of in the way that they view what's driving humans. In the 1970s, Maslow revised his model and added self-transcendence to the top there, which really is an amazing addition because it takes us from a focus on the individual personal gain, from the idea of, achieving one's full potential being the pinnacle, to actually then, okay, I know my purpose, I know what my potential is, but how does that fit into the broader context? If we're talking about a sense of meaning in the world, how does that fit? And so really interesting. And there's a beautiful quote here from Maslow. And it says, transcendence refers to the very highest and most inclusive or holistic levels of human consciousness, behaving and relating as ends rather than means to oneself, to significant others, to human beings in general, to other species, to nature, and to the cosmos. So that's a lot broader a focus than just, fulfilling my purpose here. Beautiful quote there. Abraham Maslow was actually quite heavily influenced by his time with the people of the Blackfoot Nation in Alberta, Canada. And you can see here Maslow's hierarchy is on the left-hand side. And then there's a comparison to a First Nations perspective of the Blackfoot community on the right here. Many people who see this, indigenous and otherwise, often say that Maslow's hierarchy is upside down. Other people actually say that they're completely different models. But you can see here that at the bottom, excuse me, you can see here at the bottom, self-actualization, which in Maslow's is at the top. So it's a bit interesting there to have a think about different focuses based on cultural circumstances and what's really important to the people of each of those. And then a quote from a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation, Karen Lincoln-Michael, who's a journalist. This is about the indigenous perspective on human motivational needs. To her, it's about understanding one's place in the world and acknowledging it. It's realizing each day that I have been blessed with basic necessities and giving thanks for them. It's doing my part to help my community and the greater good. Sounds a lot like self-transcendence to me. Now we're back in the present day and we're looking ahead to new horizons. This is Scott Barry Kaufman's Sailboat. And as you can see, there's the same needs, but they're laid out in a very different format here. Kaufman was under the impression that life isn't really like an ascent up a peak or a mountain. It's much more of a boat in the ocean. Life is the ocean. We are the boats. And so these initial needs here at the bottom, self-esteem, connection, safety, form the hull. And if we have holes in the hull, we're not going very far in the ocean. And so a slightly different and a bit more holistically informed perspective on, fulfilling these needs and them all kind of contributing to the way we live our lives today. And again, transcendence features up here as a sort of a bird's eye view, as a peripheral holding of not only our vessel, but all the other vessels in the ocean. And he says, yeah, each of us is a sailboat in the ocean. And then further to that, to use the sailboat metaphor, while we each travel in our own direction, a wave could come crashing down on all the boats at once, making us realize that at the end of the day, we're all sailing the vast unknown of the sea together. So a final thought here. It's not about being above humanity. It's about being a part of humanity and the rest of the world as much as possible. So from here, I'd love to open it up to the panelists to share what it is that you feel you resonate with in those models, to also to share what it is that doesn't quite make sense, so that we can get a really awesome, holistic and really kind of broadly informed idea of some of these concepts and what might be useful today and what might not be so useful. And so let's have a look here and see. I'm going to stop my share. And Dan, if you could just guide us through how to do the turn the videos off, that'd be awesome.
Sure. So what we're going to aim to do here is to, for everyone to have the panelists seemingly on stage as a panel in a sense. And so if everyone reaches down to the little video and the arrow to the bottom left, and clicks on that and goes into video settings. And then you can go hide non-video participants and be sure that there's a tick inside of that box under the meetings little category there. If anyone's having troubles with that. And then once you've done that, everyone but the panelists to switch their videos off. And you should end up with just the panelists. Ooh, I'll do the same on screen. And if you have a question at any point, please feel free, pop it in the chat or simply bring your video on and unmute your mic and go for it.
So you haven't done a thing since you put that water in there, since you boiled the jug.
We might have somebody who can just mute their mic as well as having the videos off. Having the mic muted would be great. We still got Patricia. Oh, great stuff. All right, we're there.
What are you doing?
Right. All right, so it's a bit of an open forum, really. I'm just going to be a voice in the sky now. We'd like to just open it up for any opening thoughts and ideas from what I've shared. If anything's not clear, then I can double back, but I'm pretty impressed with myself for getting all of that in 10 minutes. So let's see how we go.
Well done. I really like your disembodied MC-ship here, Lawrence. It really gives a...
Awesome.
Hearing your voice come through without a picture is really, yeah, it's great. I love this little panel setup. Thank you.
Is that person all good who was making tea? Just sounded like a little bit of a aggressive situation.
Let us know.
The elephant in the room that was also, I just don't want to pretend like it's all, hey, it's all fine, let's talk about survival. When, yeah, my attention went into that, so that's my truth.
Thanks, Alice. I didn't actually hear what was happening. I just heard the sort of the general murmur. So hopefully if there's anything that needs to come through on the chat to let us know, then that's what we'll have that available. Thank you for bringing that up.
We need to address the bottom levels of Maslow's hierarchy first, we can. So I wonder how we kick this off. Maybe I'll make a first opening comment. I think I was introduced as Ashlyn Wolf in the bio. Thank you, Lawrence. I'm really excited to be here and with you fellow panelists. And thank you so much for everyone tuning in. It's an honor to be here and talk on an interesting topic. My pen name is Ashlyn Wolf. My birth name is Simon Crawford Ash. So that will hopefully clear up one confusion for the evening, but probably the least significant. And yeah, how should we kick this off, guys? I mean, I have so many thoughts. It's such an interesting topic. Where should we begin?
Hey guys, thank you so much. Really lovely to meet you all, and thanks for just like opening that up. Simon, what would you prefer to be addressed as? Simon
or Ash. A lot of times the Ash. Simon is great. You know.
Cool. Whatever comes to mind will come out of my mouth.
Exactly.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, brother. Really great to be here. So what I saw, I don't know if anyone else saw this, that I just felt like the First Peoples or the Indigenous peoples hierarchy, it was almost like you could just pop it on top of Maslow's. It was like the extension of, and that's what it felt like to me. And I was looking at, because it went self-actualization, and was it community actualization, and then it was like perpetuation. And I thought, well, yeah, perhaps they just popped that on top, which I thought it really does, what I feel, reflect in what I see coming from, you know, the land down under, that we tend to, I feel like we deduce things down so much in the West, like we really break it down and get down to the nitty gritties of things, and can tend to have a reductionistic approach. And I just saw that this beautiful way of going, cool, we really, like, we know we need to survive, but on top of that, here's what's really important. And I just thought that was a really beautiful thing that I saw immediately, that's what the attention is brought to, and that's what they're focused on. Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, great. Sorry if you can see my big noggin going all up in there, but I've got to get in there. I don't have my glasses on. So I'm all up in your face now. Yeah, and it was almost like they just popped it on top, as if like, this is what's really important. Let's focus on this. And of course, like, we do have to look at survival, but I just feel that that's a representation of perhaps their level of consciousness of what feels really vital. And that was immediately what I noticed. I don't know what else stood out. There's so much to talk about in this, but
I mean, let's just riff on this comment for a second. I'm sure each of us have some thoughts, but I did find this very curious. And the first thing that really jumped out to me was that, you know, the bottom of our pyramid, we have whatever, there looks like half a dozen items that we need to work through to get to self-actualization. And, you know, First Nation perspective drops that down almost as a bare minimum, you know, like the starting point for people is self-actualization. And, you know, I kind of found that was either a curious reflection of a level of comfort on a whole bunch of elements of Maslow's hierarchy that, you know, in the West we obsess over, which I think is a bit what you're saying about the reductionist approach. or perhaps equally, a reflection of the neurosis of Western mindsets, where we have, so many attitudes and concerns and problems that, we believe we have. And, if we look at our lifestyle, do we really, and so where does that come from, and how much are they driving our motivations? And I think that gets to some really interesting reflections to me. I wonder about all of these models, the hierarchical nature of them, the implied, progression of things that matter to us. And sometimes I wonder if that's it at all, or if it's actually, some sense of emotional pushing and pulling inside of us that's driving so much of our behaviors, and we can categorize them as much as we like, but, maybe there's some kind of different source, than these models all imply. Maybe I'll seed that in there too. I'm sure we'll come around to all these topics.
Yeah, the key thing to take off what you were saying and add to it, the key thing that is apparent to me looking at these two models is the fact that the Maslow's hierarchy speaks to our feeling, or at least my feeling in a society that I was born into something which is greater than me, and I'm just trying to survive within it, get love from it, do something that's worthwhile. So it's something that's beyond me. Whereas if I look at self-actualization and then moving on to community actualization and cultural perpetuity, it's actually taking a responsible co-creatorship. So it's like we've got to actually not just be in the community and get love from it and have self-esteem and belonging, but I've actually got to create the community itself and think of things that are beyond me going forward as a culture. So that's the key distinction. Rather than being born into almost like a student of or subjugated by the community or society, you actually become an author of it.
You become a co-creator. That's really great. I love that. I love that perspective and what you brought to that and what's highlighted. And again, sometimes when I think about the West and our beautiful like perspectives and what we do or don't do, or where our weaknesses and growth points are, is I feel like our level of consciousness is like the kindergartens and the indigenous people. They're like the most beautiful old wise people, and we're over here being like, all right, how can I survive? And they're like, come on, catch up. This is about what you can give. In a nutshell.
Absolutely. And I think one of the impositions of our Western society is that it makes the bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy a necessary consideration, like shelter and food, whereas I think it was more provided in more traditional ways of living. But even before that, nature itself, like that's the law that I always like to come to. You have a right to have shelter. There's various shelters in caves, or you can just go and make wood or whatever, make something a shelter, and food is abundant. So those things, they've been deprived of us through our society, so therefore become a necessity to consider. But I don't think they're a natural universal law as to a fundamental consideration when it comes to survival needs.
It's a really good point.
Lockie,
you're muted.
I love that, guys. And yeah, I just, the thing that I think Ash mentioned earlier, like this concept of like this ascending process, going up the triangle to making those steps is very kind of Western thinking, and a lot of the work I've done is very circular. It's like everything is interconnected. So like a model that I definitely see with a lot of in say like on the flip side, and like say governancy, like our Western world has corporate governancy programs, which is quite hierarchical, like what this is suggesting. Whereas when you transition that into more indigenous corporations and ways of practicing culture, it's more circular and everyone's included that way. And it's quite hard for when we're kind of so, that systemic way around how we are educated to have this hierarchy. It makes these, that complementing way, it makes it really difficult. My reflections on this, when I was really thrilled to be in part of this dialogue, because a lot of this journey, a lot of these old school coaches, and well, not necessarily old school, but it's the simplified way around personal development. How I got into it was through Maslow's. This is the journey up. And I more recently practiced a lot of the work of rite of passage. And we kind of talk about the staircase. And it is ascending. You are making these transitions from child to adult. And you wonder, where in this, on the left, the old school, Maslow's, the journey there is like, imagine in old school ways, we'd be already starting up with the journey of self-actualizing because we've already got these needs provided for us. So yeah, it is. That's my kind of 2 cents.
The way that I see talking about the hierarchy, I see it slightly differently as to what that triangle means. I don't necessarily think of it as sequential, like you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. I see it more what will give way first. And I do rites of passage and ritual and embodiment practices too, particularly focused on talking about motivational needs, on the needs aspect. And I think at some stage, if you put duress on each of these levels, you'll see which one has rank and priority. So I think you need to have your food and your shelter taken care of. For example, if you were to, and let's take the physiological needs of air as a really easy example. I think people will quickly do away with their rank in society or their love and belonging if you take away their ability to breathe. Like that is so fundamental. And so the other ones will collapse first, and then the last one to collapse is your physiological needs. So that's kind of how I see the hierarchy. Is the higher ones are lighter because you just will be so focused on the fundamental, the one underneath it, before you can even have the mental space to then worry about the next level up.
Could I jam on this with you, Atlas? Because I think it's a really fascinating idea, and it's, you know, it's my common understanding of Maslow as well. You know, this degree of hierarchy, or most important, you know, pillar kind of quality to these ones that are underneath. But if I think about reflecting this in a Western context, and I say, you know, for sure, you take away my air, I'm going to do anything to get it back, you know, and if you make me physically, like truly physically unsafe, that will be a real priority. But then I think about that in the context of most people, you know, probably most of us living in a relatively affluent environment, relatively safe. It becomes quite blurry what is an actual attack on these levels, you know, because I think that probably a lot of people would say, yeah, well, you know, does my safety needs, I think a lot of safety needs are triggered, you know, by, you know, our influence with social media, or us walking down the street, or an impression that our boss doesn't like us, or, you know, these sorts of things are triggering safety needs. But the problem I sometimes have with this framework is that it implies you need to resolve them because they're a real safety need. It almost implies the realness of these things. And I wonder if we have some way of separating out what we call like a genuine physical threat, like what is that? Like a realness threat on these Maslow things, versus what I think is a far more predominant situation in today's society, which is a perhaps an emotional threat flavored in one of these angles of Maslow's needs, which perhaps needs exactly the opposite response, which is to not take it so seriously and instead find some kind of a different, okay, we can have a conversation what to do about that. But do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, I've got heaps to say, but I also don't want to capitalize on too much of the time. Does anyone else have something to speak to that? Otherwise, I 100% have an answer or a viewpoint on that.
No. I'm learning here, and I'll just chip in as we go.
Cool.
I'd love to share. Actually, it's Lawrence calling in from above.
Hey, Lawrence.
Welcome back, Rod.
So really quickly, I'd love to just chat to everyone on the call here and say something that I did before this was had a chat with a member of the Blackfoot Nation, and his name is Ryan Heavyhead. He wasn't able to join us for this session because it's about 3 a.m. where he is, and you know, it's just, you know, I asked, but what we did do is actually record the interview and have taken a few S scripts, and one of them is talking about this very thing that we're riffing on here about starting with self-actualization, and it's the Blackfoot perspective on an alternative, I guess. And so what I wanted to do was just very quickly share this video. It's a minute, but it's pretty pertinent to what we're talking about. So excuse me 1 minute whilst we iron out the technical difficulties. And then I'm gonna share my screen. This is a way of incepting a fifth panelist into this, only when what he shared already is on point. So let me find the video file. The technology, so if I share my screen. Right, can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Blackfoot, you talk about like arriving in, you know, becoming kind of a full person, hey?
Lawrence, if you press pause and
Here,
at
you
the share screen,
I'll point out that in
Say again, Dan.
when you go to share screen, there's a little box at the bottom that allows you to share audio as well, computer audio.
You can't hear anything?
It's low.
Okay,
Here
cool.
anyway.
Let's try that one again. Okay, so we do. Yeah, cool. I got it. So we share computer sound as well and do this. All right.
Might want to bring it down.
It's going to be too loud.
Blackfoot, you talk about like arriving in, you know, becoming kind of a full person. Hey. Here, you know, a lot of people will point out that in a lot of the most famous kind of Blackfoot stories of heroes who have arrived, you know, into themselves in a way, they don't necessarily start with all of their you know, physiological and social needs met. In fact, they're often the most, you know, impoverished and social outcasts that have made the significant differences in you know, the history of the evolution of Blackfoot spiritual tradition. And like a lot of the bundles come from people that are you know, not having their needs met, but then they do something spectacular, you know.
Yeah, awesome. And I think I can pick it up from there and also to working what Ash was talking about and to reflect on the Blackfoot perspective. It makes total sense that those who have the least, and also this is what I've found in doing my quests. I've traveled across various continents, not using any money and using sort of social interaction or art as a form of currency. Those who have the least give the most. And I think it talks directly to what Ash was talking about these false levels of survival needs, because I totally agree that so many of those primal things are not pressing on our door. We don't really have physical danger for most of us, most of the time. And so I think and also the rites of passage that Lockie was talking about are so vital for this reason. It's this idea of stepping across that threshold of perceived death. And also when you look at many spiritual traditions, they often encourage to die before we die. So we get used to this level of opening ourselves to life and realizing there's just more life on the other side. So I 100% encourage these kind of processes of pushing up against the illusion of the Maslow's bottom level of these sort of things, and by directly doing it, by fasting, by sleeping outside, by, you know, directly going to the face of these things and realizing, wow, I still live. And all of a sudden our perspective, because I think our mind is aimed towards self-actualization or transcendence, and there's this real coming home when you go, I don't have to worry about these perceived threats on my life, because they're actually not perceived, they're actually not threats on my life. And so I think, talking about the Blackfoot perspective, the amazing initiations, rites of passage, and perspective of those who have so little is a natural outcome from having to test those things and realizing you don't die, and there's actually always another option.
Could I jump in with a little comment? Do you want to go for it? I'll hold it.
It's a question for both of you guys who, and I'm not sure if all three of you do it, but rites of passage is just perspective. So I was going to go somewhere else, so please.
We have there's so many directions to go. But what I just loved about what was said then is that I feel like actually we're really ragging on Maslow, poor Maslow. I feel like the hierarchy is misleading in a few ways. And one of them is that it seems to imply that the path to actualization is satisfaction of these needs. And I think that, you know, not only is that like so Western, you know, like it's so purpose driven, it's like achievement oriented, like I've got to tick off my 6 things and I get there, you know, like this is like the attitude to which it comes. I think it's misleading in the direction to take, because I think so many of our needs to a minimal level are already satisfied on that, even though they feel like they're not. That in fact, the way towards self-actualization, I would throw out there, and I'm sure
to strip that back,
is to go in the opposite direction. It's to challenge that. You know, like the times where I felt most in myself and most separate from my anxieties and fears have been, you know, doing something like the Wim Hof method and holding my breath and being in ice cold water and triggering survival responses, like genuinely triggering survival responses. And in doing so, feeling so at peace because I really could see the difference between a genuine threat and an emotional threat at some deeper level of myself. And that really points towards how easy it is to get this whole thing upside down, where we're constantly trying to get something outside of ourselves to satisfy this feeling of need, but actually that's just going deeper into the delusion.
Yeah, I love that. Lockie, do you mind if I chip in there? Do you want to say something?
Keep it going. I've got some stuff to say, but you go.
Okay, thank you. So I just have two different perspectives that I want to jam on that go with this, and especially most particularly down the rites of passage that Western Australia we don't have, or often in the West we don't have one really, unless it's created by men like yourselves or people like yourselves for people to initiate through. And with my background, I worked a lot with addiction and trauma for a long time, and looking at you know, how it's created, what that is in our emotional body, in our fracturedness of ourself, when there's an intensity of energy within ourselves, and what happens on all of our different levels within ourselves. And when we work with people on retreat, and Simon, you triggered this thought, we do a lot of traditional work in different types of ceremonies. We go from sweat lodge to a lot of deep breath work to ice baths. And so we put these people in that space where they have no other option but to go in rather than go out. And what I find is that when we are put in that place where everything is stripped back, except we are faced with that, you know, this sense of deathness, so to speak, it accelerates that self-actualization process for us. And I've had this thought going around in my head, and I would love to throw this and hear your thoughts on the Atlas and anyone else who has ever done and held rites of passage around depression. And I've had this thought that perhaps this is
oppression or depression.
Depression, like the depression, right? This labeling of depression, that it's almost like I don't know, perhaps a part of ourself, a self-induced rite of passage, because we're not taking it. So therefore, there has to be a sense of darkness, right? So because a lot of what I work with is like going in, you know, we have to go in, or go like put under that pressure that we were talking about to go in, to discover, to come back out. And I feel that depression often is, and I'm not saying all of it, but quite often what I've seen in people in those darkest places, because I've worked with a lot of suicide, a lot of people right at that edge of helplessness, there's that tipping point where if they can see that is there for them to pop out the other side of, and that is why it's there, it becomes this rite of passage for them, right? That well, if we don't do it, and these are just my thoughts, so I'd love to hear from people who run it. If we don't do it ourselves, then our higher conscious or something goes, here you go, here's your womb that you need to go back and do, or here's your dark space, or here's your walkabout within yourself that you need to stumble and fall and be lost within and then pop back out the other side. But because of our I just have to say spoiled senses in the West, which I love, like, don't get me wrong, but because we're so spoiled and we're so comfortable, once we get in there, Lockie, you're bursting.
No, I find this really energizing. It's good.
Once we get in there, because we're so used to feeling comfortable, we can't have this beautiful experience of a rite of passage because we get stuck on, oh my God, I feel something, and we don't know what to do with it, you know? So I'm just going to dump that there and
I think it's a really awesome you acknowledge that, because I think, you know, there's a lot of people who are feeling, you know, whatever it is, low at the moment. And is that depression, whatever it is, as a result of COVID, things have changed and they're forced to do things differently. And that change is a fundamental, or that transition phase is fundamental to a rite of passage. One of the big things, and I reckon we can jam all of us guys and get everyone about this conversation. But one thing that I really like acknowledging when people say a rite of passage, you know, we've been doing it and think, oh, we don't really do much of that in Western Australia. Weddings are a rite of passage. Funerals are a rite of passage. Your first kiss is a rite of passage. Whatever. These are all rite of passages. And how we acknowledge these experiences influences how transformational these experiences will be. Is your community acknowledging this experience you had? Is a big part of it, but also are you having times to reflect on that experience and how you are going to be different rather than going back to how you used to be pre that experience. So that's one thing I think is really cool to acknowledge, is that, we do this, and think about, people listening, they may be having weddings, and you may be wondering, well, how can a big fundamental part of the rite of passage process, they've got, is that transition, but after that, the transformation phase. So prior to that, you've got, everyone has to be enrolled. So you have to want to do it. And then you have to, enrolled, and then a separation. So an experience different to your norm, and then some form of transformation phase, which will be where you actually are, there's a bit of drama, a bit of sound exposure, like breath works, music, whatever it is. And then there's this real phase of where you do feel a part of you could die, right? Before that experience. And then you go to a vision phase, and then you go into reintegration phase into your old way of life. And what happens, that reintegration phase is crucial. That's where you get acknowledged by your community for having gone through that experience. And if you don't do that properly, the rite of passage isn't robust and sound. And so that's kind of a basic 101 in a rite of passage process. And I bet the other guys have probably missed a few things here and there. I'd love them to probably add on. But I think acknowledging there's a phase transition to it, and exactly what you're saying, like, I look as an entrepreneur, I certainly have my rounds of depression. I have it, but I embrace it. I get so down and out, and I see it as my rite of passage. This is me becoming of age, becoming my next version of Lockie, and I get fucking down. And that is I get strength knowing that that's the cocoon that I'm going through right now. It could go for 6 months. It could go for 2 years, 5 years. I don't know. But I have faith in knowing that there's something else out there for me. So that's how I personally deal with it, having been someone who's experienced depression up and down over the past few years.
Yeah, thanks, Lockie. That's it's really great to get an overview of rites of passage, whether they're a facilitated journey that someone takes you through or holds space for you to go on, or whether it's something that we bring for ourselves, something that we once we know that framework or know the power of that that container, to actually apply it to our lives in various ways. And something that's coming up that I'd love to ask, and it's kind of steering us back towards, we're talking about these various types of human motivational needs, and what the outcome or intended result of a rite of passage is. So through that process, when we emerge at the other side, are we talking about reaching a state of self-actualization only, or is there also the consideration of a rite of passage, as you said, held by community, and therefore becomes relevant or indeed connected to what a community needs, or coming out of a rite of passage and us actually then also saying, okay, I know my place, and I've brought myself through this dark time. What next? Is it then just about staying insular to that and saying, okay, I'm protected, I know my direction? Or can we also talk about the way that how then that fits in, how then we can show up more effectively for the world from that place?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to that, because I also saw, with regards to what you just said there, Lawrence, and also there's a question in the chat from Felicity asking why I felt that we were geared towards self-transcendence. And that kind of answers your question you just asked there. I would say that the outcome of a rite of passage, of course, there are many different outcomes, but if we talk about the long-term effects, the difference between self-actualization and self-transcendence would be freeing ourselves from the trap of self-obsession, which I think that our modern society rewards us with the personalized number plates, or the change the profile picture here, or you can all be the kings and the gods, and it's sold to us as freedom, but we actually get incarcerated and trapped in a self-obsession. for example, talking about depression as well, how many of us would feel depressed? I'm not talking about necessarily the chemical depression, like that can be a separate thing, but talking about the depressions which can come on, for example, if you break up with someone, and Lockie was talking about being an entrepreneur, and I'm in a similar position, we go for something which we think is going to be great and we don't get it, and we have self-doubt and self-loathing and all these kind of things. How many of us have a similar reaction when we think about community and the fact that we're still pumping out these things into the environment, or the fact that our rape culture is still on the rise and this and that? Probably far fewer, because we are obsessed with self-actualization, and what happens to me in my storybooks is more important than the community, and we don't get the punch in the guts when we look at the world quite in the same kind of way. So my approach to helping with depression, and like I said, we can leave the chemical nature of it alone, because there is two things either side which are really affecting it. The first one is this mental state, which I believe is the illusion of society, which tells us and programs us with certain success metrics and importances and values and worthwhile, which directly come down into what Ash was talking about before, this threat on our life. And I think, you know, the way that our brain has evolved, the way we've evolved, our anatomy still takes it as the same thing. If you put a gun to my face, or you tell me that I'm out of the boys' club, somewhere on a physiological level, I equate it, even in the subconscious, with I'm actually going to be killed right now. So it comes down to this kind of space. And so I think free ourselves from the psychological programming on top of the depression, which is giving all this meaning to the momentary thing that happened. And then we can come down to the physiological level and understand, because of our society, our physiology is being affected by the toxic things we're eating, by the electric fields that we're sleeping in, all these kind of things. We're kind of sandwiched, and regardless of what your biochemistry is, your brain chemistry, etc., there are these two societal, artificial, arbitrary layers that we're sandwiched between. So that would be my approach to solve or helping with depression, is take people through rites of passages where you directly shred the fabrication of these societal metrics of success. And then you come down to the physiological level of dealing with your needs by doing a detox first, flush out the kidneys, get yourself off sugar, and get all these sort of things, so that whatever we're left with is a true biochemical thing. But also it all comes down to signals. Can you have a signal come into your body and know it is just an invitation to some sort of response, not a knee-jerk reaction? And we are so bad at that, like talking about comfort, as you were saying, Amber, we're so bad at feeling a bit of hunger or a bit of anger or a bit of arousal or a bit of fear without just absorbing it into the ecosystem, making sure we're not being programmed by the psychological society, feeling the discomfort, and then going forward. And so that would be, I think, the ultimate end of any rites of passage, would be at a place where you have the capacity to hold these two sandwiches, the psychological and the primal. And then I believe we are programmed towards self-transcendence as opposed to actualization, because in all of the different really mind-blowing kind of moments of breakthrough that I've either been a part of or witnessed in others, the love comes through when you don't worry about yourself, you dissolve, you come into the void, you die before you die, and you are completely externally focused, and that pan-determined altruistic love for community, love for the future generations, that seems to be, from my experience, the thing that time and time again, when we free ourselves from the self-obsession, uniformly and universally is a human characteristic. We love the whole. We want to be more than ourselves. And to be honest, we're not actually that interested in our personal stories. We are here like wild animals looking into the jungle and in love with the sunset, in love with people. We will dive in front of a car to save a child. We will do such beautiful things when we transcend self. And I think that is our natural state.
Well, it makes sense that we can really only unify when we're in that space of non-self anyway, really. Because it's like, how can we unify if there is me?
I have thoughts I'd love to jam on top of that. But what's coming up first of all is just another little framework before we push that further. I think it's related. You know, we're talking about different models of motivation, I guess, and different ways of thinking about what's actually driving humans, and almost implicit in this kind of like stages of human development, you know, like that's kind of part of the topic as well, I guess. And, you know, one model that I've heard of from a few sources is, you know, broadly around a journey that we go through from something that's pre-personal to very personal to transpersonal, you know, or another way of saying that being, you know, a part of a community, but without really a sense of identity, and, you know, really being for the community, but from a unthinking, basking, just absorbed, enmeshed, you know, in the way a young child is part of the family without really ever questioning or thinking about their role or position within it. Or I've heard this also applied to a state that is far more common in some of the, you know, First Nation communities, where they're brought up in such a perfect environment of community attitude that there is no sense of individual identity as a concept that needs to be struggled with. And like, is this my right role in the tribe? You know, like that's just not a question that ever gets asked. And so it's kind of beautifully pre-personal in a way. And then there's this rise of personal attitude, which is exemplified by America, Western society, you know, this I, me, my issues, the self-obsession that you talked about, and the growth of my own wantings and my own desires and getting the things that I want. And while we put that down a lot, you know, I think it's fair to say that that's also a real rite of passage. Like there's a real journey to go through there around owning and claiming your desires and your wantings, and being, you know, consents and boundaries and honesty, and all these sorts of things come from a true claiming of that personal nature. Because it seems, or at least I've never really heard of it, it doesn't seem possible to get a glimpse of personal attitudes and then go back to pre-personal. You know, it never works. You know, as soon as you open that can, you kind of just have to continue taking the journey right through personal stage, which involves inherently owning something of who you are and what you want and your individuality, but hopefully not getting lost along the way into all sorts of superficial things that don't actually get you anywhere. And then hopefully having owned that, and, you know, that's a whole phase of interestingness, you know, then you get to this transpersonal, where your focus is no longer on the individual, but you've transcended that, and now you care, and applying all this willpower and clarity and you know, ability for you to get what you want for the community, you know, and you become a really powerful community oriented person. It feels related, but slightly different to what we're saying. And, you know, and also fascinating considering the different types of communities and their models as well, putting that against it.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes total sense to me what you're saying. And I think it makes me think of like spiral dynamics and Ken Wilber's integral theory sort of going through and transcending. And it makes sense as far as, you know, once you've got your own primal shelter taken care of, you go into community values and the moralistic sort of living and being a part of something, then you move through that into your personal, which is what you're talking about, like my right for these things, and then you transcend that and you become more holistic as you move up the spiral. And I've seen this so many times, that we fight for those things which we think we can lose. There's this largesse and calmness for people who can easily create, like a poet or a painter who can just paint every day. The painting burns or someone steals their book of poetry. They're like, that's a shame. I'll write another one, you know? But if it was like the one poem, you got through all of your creative blocks and you went to therapy and you wrote one poem and it was stolen, you'd just be like, it's just like, because I can't create more. And so I think that's the cool thing about the personal phase, is when you own it and you go, oh, cool, I can have a car, or I can have a partner, or I can self-pleasure, or I can go and get a job, whatever. It's like, oh, I can now relax because I have confidence in my ability to create. You become the source of it. And then, you know, the river just gives water constantly because it knows it is the source. And so I think that's the value of the personal state you're talking about.
I'd love just to share something real quick.
Oh, the voice.
The voice has returned
from above.
Just want to put, can we see that? So we're back on self-transcendence here. Just really wanted to speak to very quickly, Ash, what you were talking about with the pre-personal, personal, and transpersonal. I was researching that very thing when I first discovered this Maslow's new hierarchy of needs. So it's incredibly relevant, incredibly pertinent in that sense, that the personal stage, look at how much of this triangle, or this pyramid here, is personal stage all the way up to self-actualization, and then this very, very small kind of pinnacle here is self-transcendence. But it's a really powerful one too. You know, we're talking about the 1970s. We're talking about the emergence of spirituality, certainly in the West, and these ideas of, oh, it's more than just about me now. So it's really cool that you just brought in that idea of the transpersonal, because I think transpersonal equates to this idea of transcending the self, that transpersonal psychology is a whole emerging field of work which both Maslow's later work really indicates, but then also so does Kaufman here with his Selberg.
And it's interesting, you could almost take these, if you took the area of each square and added it up, it's almost a reflection of the society that wrote its relative importance.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like in the 30s, it was 100% personal from the West, which is where this was written. And then in the 70s, there was a tiny drop of transpersonal that people realized should be part of their aspiration, but it was still a minority of their thinking. And in First Nations, it's like, maybe a half or a third is individual focused and then the rest goes community focused, because that was definitely the orientation of their perspective. And, in the 2019 one, I think for sure this concept of transpersonal and transcendence is much larger in our sense of aspiration. Though I think we're very tangled in our attempts to get there. And I think often we walk in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Ash, I was just thinking as Atlas, you spoke about the spiral dynamics, and it's something that I love to use a lot. I'm so fascinated by it. I remember, 10 years ago or something, when I first read it, I just thought it was the bee's knees. And hold on, my screen's on me on you, Ash. Not that I don't like looking at your noggin, but I want to see everyone. There we go. So, and I thought immediately of, and then someone else said, transpersonal psychology, speaking of Ram Dass, would always talk about, and I found this really beautiful, I'm going to butcher whatever he says because he was eloquent and this is not, but about really just accepting where we are at, even though we're talking about this, and this is a beautiful reflection and we're having this awareness at the same time. I don't think that we can avoid, both as an individual, as a collective, as a global, as a culture, whatever is happening in the cosmos, this evolution. I think everyone's all at different stages. And I think I said this at the very beginning, I feel like in the West, we're the kindergartners and the beautiful indigenous tribes are like trying to teach us this wisdom. But at the same time, I think, and I just wanted to throw it out there, anyone ever listening, what's really important is to always have such deep compassion for this and where we are as a society. It's like we're doing real good and really shit at the same time, if that makes sense. It's like we're making a lot of fuck ups and we're doing some things really backwards. And it is also where we are at. And well, I love that we want to look at perhaps what might be our deepest truth at our highest level, to have that self-actualization, but then that self-transcendence at the same time. If we want to rush past our humanity, I think we're forgetting a really important chunk of this, what I feel is this choice that I made to be human in this many lifetimes. So I just really think my bottom line there is I think it's important to remember and be deeply compassionate towards the fact that we are human, and that is work to be done in that amongst all of this.
And thanks for that, Ash. And what's kind of come up for me from the last, what we've just been talking about more recently, is that compassion of the humans. But what I'm finding, a lot of my thinking these days is like a lot of this dialogue that we're having, we're very fortunate to have this dialogue. We're thinking about these different concepts. But then a lot of, Australians, a lot of people around the world, if you look at Maslow's, they just want food, water, shelter. And that's their number one. That's all they can have time to think about, and because and so much fear, not necessarily even the social media concept, but just genuinely food, water, shelter. And then I start thinking about like even, people lower socioeconomic areas. It's like talking about these ideas around contributing to a greater community and these things like that. Actually, you have your partner, your spouse, maybe your kids. That's all that matters. And then that for me, it's kind of built up a lot of compassion when you start understanding, when people aren't thinking like this idea of self-actualization or self-transcendence, is that they're just so caught up in serving their nucleus of their family unit. And I don't know, it's just something that just come up for me as this conversation that kind of leads into what Ruth was talking about in the comments about like this evolution theory around, and, you know, people who talk about it's actually, you know, the tribes. And so like, this is our kind, this is our community. We look out for them, and everyone else comes second because this is our community, which is number one. I know it's just an interesting thing that's kind of come up for me after this chat.
Yeah, I see the way we can look at the segmentation of society, whether it be West versus the Indigenous elders, or whether it be people in privileged situations versus those who are struggling. That in itself is a unnecessary over complexity into, once again, the mind. I think we in the West, which is also ironically, I'm classifying them myself, but the way that we approach these things, we want to have too much control over that which we cannot control, which is natural law. So there was even also a question about, you know, are people made in the image of God? There was a question up earlier before. I don't think it's necessarily evidence of that or not. And we can so easily get caught in the theory. I think the most interesting thing is to look at the practical results and evidence. So I don't know if the fact that people after the breakthroughs become self-transcendent is evidence we're made in the image of God. I don't know. All I know is that it's evidence that that is the state we enter when we break through and let go of our inhibitions. And so I think the key thing that I know, we're also having compassion, you know, we're doing well, we're in our personal evolutions, let's be easy on ourselves. Yes, to some degree, but also the single uncompromising, it's not uncompassionate, it's like tough love perspective I like to take on myself and others is, are you honoring your integrity? Or are you softening or compromising in order to get something which you kind of think you need, but have never tested whether you actually need it or not, but you're in the illusion you need it, and so you violate your own personal integrity to defend that thing. And I think that is where we often are at. Even if you're out, you know, in the bush and you're looking after your nucleus, I think that comes from fear. I think always the self-transcendent aspect is always easier, is always safer, because we have power in numbers, we have resources to share, we have beautiful pilgrimages to go on. And I think that's where it comes back to the animals in the group chat. Do animals not have the ability to be self-transcendent because they're looking after themselves? Not necessarily. I think they just honor their instincts. They don't give a shit what you think about them. They're going to do what they know in that moment. And that could play out in a self-transcendent way when you look at the macro level. You know, an ant doing this particular thing, which it thinks is for itself, is helping build the ant hill, which then helps the water flow, which then helps this. And, you know, it's this big butterfly effect. We don't know our particular actions. So my encouragement to everyone is to tune into your heart what you really want. Don't think I need to be self-transcendent, or I need to self-actualize, or don't worry about this. Is all in the mind. We're too self-obsessed and we're trying to control. The fact is, nature will, like we're like dancing on the hand, but the hand of God or nature or whatever it is going in its sway of evolution. And if I stand here on the hand or here on the hand, the hand's going this way anyway. So I think we need to unhand control and listen to ourselves. And if we each do that, I think nature will play out. And some of us will self-actualize, some of us will be self-transcendent, but in the mandala, the holistic mandala, we will then allow that to go. And the only reason this is a problem is because human beings have created technology of tools which exaggerate and extend our capacity as an individual to affect more of the ecosystem than ever before. So that's why a little bit of an aberration, a small men's group of a few hundred people can do actions which feel like the footprint of millions. That's why it's a problem. Otherwise, opinions really wouldn't matter. But the fact is, opinions in the hands of people who have influence over tools can therefore stampede and really shift the natural balance. So that was my single and only trumpet call, is each of us individually, are you honoring what you know? And if not, that is your death. That is all you're left with at the end of the day when you close your eyes in that box or whatever it is. Like, did you violate yourself simply to fit into something else, being goaded by fear? And I think love, I know it sounds like a universal concept, but love leads to life, leads to bravery, leads to self-actualization, leads to self-transcendence, and ultimately the simple truth that we are a part of a collective, and that collective will naturally balance out through symbiosis, through natural diffusion, through, you know, all our science, our chemistry, our physics comes into play. It will balance out. But we've got a lot of force holding these arbitrary human mental constraints of control.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
It's amazing, Atlas. Thank you.
I love it. Super interesting. Can we riff on a few of these points? Because I think it's, you know, I relate to a lot of.
Jump in real quick. So time check, my friends.
Okay.
Can you believe it? We've got 15 minutes left. And Ash, and I totally reflect where you're coming from. We're just getting started here. I'd love you to continue your point, but I just wanted to jump in and say, over the next 15 minutes or so, I'd love to hear from particularly Amber, Ash, and Lockie now with their trumpet call, with their framing of how can we apply. We've been doing a lot of picking apart of these models and concepts, and how can we now start to look at what we can take in today and you know, for our own lives and apply from what we've got. So that I'd love to be able to steer the conversation to that, to what would be your most potent formula in terms of how to be with and relate to our motivation, what drives us, and ensuring that we are doing this from a sense of our own personal truth, as Atlas put it. So yeah, be great for that to be where we head from here. But back to you, Ash. I'd love to hear what you had to say.
Cool. Well, let me swing it in that direction. So I think personal truth is a great theme. I mean, I relate. For me, the model that I apply to myself and people that I work with is this sense that we do have a quiet inner voice somewhere, you know, and I think this is what you mean by personal truth. I think it's what you're referring to, Atlas, whether that's us or something else, or, you know, who knows at this point. The point is that there's a quiet inner voice that seems to guide us quite well. And when we ignore that, we get in all sorts of trouble. The thing that I'd add, though, that I find really fascinating is that the degree of subtlety in how misdirected we can get when we think we're attempting to listen to it is deep. There's a lot to it, you know. I mean, and I look back on my life and I look at some of the decisions I've made, which have been made intentionally, you know, and I was deciding what to study and, you know, or what job to take. And I was trying to, you know, I really had a framework where I believed in making a decision for the greater good and I wanted to have impact on the world. And like, these were my conscious ideas. And I look back after having gained a little more self-awareness and I realized that, you know, I studied what I did because studying physics felt too nerdy and I didn't want that, you know, and it was actually this feeling that was driving me. And then I quit and played golf because that felt better. It had nothing to do with my allegedly self-actualized thoughts and beliefs and intents, you know, and I think that subtlety of where we're actually acting from, you know, how do we actually see? And what I think that is, I think relates to what Atlas was saying about this, you know, false level of motivation, this whole, like, this is the area of investigation. This is the place to get curious about, you know. My trumpet call would be to say, you know, look inside and get really subtle, you know, really feel what's going on and question your decisions, because your decisions are all your life is. And where are they really coming from? I'd say most of us, all of us, have far less of an idea than we think. You know, when I look back and realize the reasons I made decisions, so often they're because of some subtle feeling that was pulling me in a direction that felt better than something else. And when later on, when I looked at that, you know, the reason why I, you know, wanted to play golf was because it felt free and it felt like I could be physical. And that didn't feel like, you know, the feeling I had boxed in being a nerdy student studying maths, you know, and like, really? Like, that's what I was making my life on? Like, the feeling of not being nerdy, you know, like, this is wild, you know, and even now, you know, a decade later, when I think that I'm so much more self-aware, you know, what's this cap doing on my head? Is this just part of an image to, like, look cool? And, you know, like, I really question these things, how subtle and how influenced I still am by these things that are inside of my mind, despite a decade of self-reflection. And it's an endless quest of this subtlety. And the important point to me is that there is a quiet truth, and the deception to ourselves is deep. So, you know, the more quiet we can get, the more still we can get, the more we can challenge our own survival and have these experiences which take us deeper inside of ourselves in whatever modality that kind of does something for you, the more we can get better at sitting with emotion, because generally it's emotion that pushes us around. So the more we can have a chance to actually sit with it and not act, really sit, the more chance we have of settling down to the bottom to find the source of where that emotion's coming from. You know, these are things to me that make a big difference on understanding what's really motivating us. And I don't think it's the aspirational Maslow's hierarchy. I think it's pushes and pulls on an emotional level that are attempting to drive us towards some congruent sense of identity. And that's probably not the inner voice. And we want to learn to separate those out.
I third that. And I think you guys are incredible. And thank you so much. I feel very honored to be here, and I feel really alive from listening to you. And especially the subtlety. One of the things that after all these years, and I'll raise my hand with that, Ash, of being like so many of the motivations of the things that I studied, like studying medicine and studying psychology and studying all these different things because of like a sense of self-importance and feeling like if I didn't do that, because of all of these different things, right? And now 10 years later, I'm like, can you just please learn how to breathe? That's it, do that. And then we'll talk about everything else. And so that's why I'm super honored, guys. Thanks for asking me to like introduce the breath. I will never shut up about it, because if you can get yourself into a state of coherence with your breath, then like the mind can calm, and perhaps you can even sense emotions that before you were so disassociated from, and then perhaps you can become familiar with them. Then you might be afraid of them, and then you might be able to regulate them. Could you imagine if we all regulated our emotions, you know, and had this beautiful state of like connection with ourselves and our body and our inner intelligence? So my trumpet thing is breath. Learn how to coherently breathe. Breathe through your nose. Use your diaphragm as often as you possibly can. Don't breathe heavy. Don't breathe, necessarily deep unless you're doing that consciously for some specific outcome. Breathe gently and evenly and rhythmically, and bring your attention to your breath as often as you can, and connect and respect it. And then from there, I think you'll be able to figure out everything that we're trying to point at. So that's my trumpet call. Respect, pay attention to your breath, and learn how to work with it.
Wow, it's so awesome. I feel honored to be here. Yeah, second that. And we say this saying, Leon is singing right now. I'm feeling joyful. I guess it's just trying to land the plane. I think it's really a combination of what everyone's kind of saying. And for me, it's about that time. I think it's that activity creates clarity. I think some young people don't necessarily think that. They get, oh, what is my purpose? What is my purpose? But if they don't go out and pick up the shovel, they don't go out and contribute to a group, they don't do some course, pick up the golf set, do the medicine degree or whatever the activity, they're not going to get clarity through that. So I think there's a part of that breath and that quiet time to allow your subconscious to process this stuff. But then you've got to pick up the shovel and get to work, and then stop and reflect, rather than getting caught up in the front of your head about the thinking. Give you time to stop, to breathe, reflect, take action, and you'll be good.
Yeah.
Deadly. Thank you. That was just so awesome.
Like we needed the boom boom, like some kind of crescendo there at the end.
Lawrence, where's the
DJ in the wheel?
I'm just nerding out over here and taking heaps of notes to send round to our viewers and community afterwards. We really love doing that, synthesizing the various points and things that you're bringing forward. It's all incredible. We've got a few more minutes for anything that's coming through, and then we've been synthesizing and gathering questions and some comments from the chat. So we're going to just give those a little bit of light, time in the limelight. So from anything that's just been said there, I guess, a big part of this was to look at these models, look at these various perspectives of human motivation, and to bring them together and offer or explore what from each of these models, as well as what we've riffed on, as well as what we've all brought from our own personal perspectives, is what can we also harvest and gather from, for example, the indigenous perspective, being very much more focused on cultural perpetuity as a concept, and some of the beautiful wisdom that we received or was imparted to us from Ryan was around this, and it feels like it would be really good just to bring it in, because I think this is when Ryan would say this very thing were he with us right now. So I'm gonna attempt another video share. let me just one more time. Let's have a look.
Ryan's trumpet call.
Yes, exactly. So if I share my screen.
I think a practice of reciprocation is something that needs to be groomed, in Western society. Hey, because just doing those little practices, like just giving something, if you're going to pick berries, even whatever token it is, at least that whole that putting that in your mind that you have to give, you have to give something if you're going to take. You have to reciprocate. It's not just to take like you're in a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Reciprocal.
Yeah.
And you said Aktsim Skatsim, excuse the pronunciation.
Yeah. Aktsim Skatsim, and it's a real interesting concept because in Blackfoot it's closely related. It's the active form for what in Blackfoot Atsimoiskan is the word that people would gloss in English as prayer. But it's not really prayer. It's reciprocating with voice. It's expressing gratitude and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then Atsimskatsin is the active part of that. Instead of in voice, you're doing it, in your activities. You're expressing gratitude and giving back. Okay.
So I wanted to drop that in because I think it adds an important layer to what we've been talking about. The fact that we're talking about these activities and also this time for reflection and breath as an introspective element, something that we do at Yes And, we talk about the inner work that needs to be done, but then also the work that needs to be done in showing up in the world and what it means to be a part of, a community, but also then part of the world itself and how we contribute to that, how we really live from a generative place. And regeneration, generative for ourselves, generative for others, generative for the whole ecosystem. And so I think what Ryan's talking to there is very much that, like through our actions as well as our words, through everything that we do, is that reciprocal nature with everything else that we're a part of. Feels like a much healthier way to be involved in an ecology. And so, wanted to just bring that in and hear any thoughts from any of you about that before we go to questions and comments.
Lawrence, I would love to add something that I forgot.
Please.
Okay, thanks. My second favorite thing to the breath is joy. I believe that in this big, beautiful world, what we're talking about is so deeply important. And this transcendence of self it's vital. And if we can relax into that at the same time and not get tight and tense about having to do this and relax into the beingness of life. And the easiest way to get into that, because I think we think, well, then how do I be? And it gets cognitive and we go all up in here about it thinking, how do I be? How do I be? Am I being now? Is it being? And if we just simply consider, perhaps through inner coherent state, and asking what would bring me joy. But when you're asking that question, ask it as if you know that your joy is a contribution to the world in a way of your vibration. So it can be an addition. It's not a what will bring me joy so that I can feel joy, but what is joy and how can I move with that? And how can I be guided by that? And how can I initiate that joy within myself that's within to be of service, to lift that vibration and spread that into and through and beyond anyone I come into contact with, and that my thoughts vibrate at that level and I can think consciously and it becomes less of a tense action I need to take in order to transcend myself. When we get out of here and we get back into our heart and it becomes open and we become grounded in that. And then on what you said, Lockie, it's so much easier to take action from that place. And we do get tense and caught up in, cognitive about everything. So I just wanted to add that I truly, out of everything that I've learned about trauma and depression and addiction, that if we can loosen the grip of our mind and that the identity that causes us so much pain and suffering, the easiest way is first through the breath and then through joy. So I just wanted to add that and you know, bring that. And that's my final trumpet, I promise. Thank you.
I just following on from that video, Lawrence, that you shared, you know, you being reciprocal, this idea of reciprocity, you know, you give, you receive, and that, I think it's, I personally try to bring that as consciously into front of my mind more often. I find I can do that more when I am connecting with the environment is a big thing for me. And it's an amazing thing that I think we don't really learn much about, you know, when I was going through school, and that was really a great introduction to me in with my Indigenous family in the Kimberley, learning a lot about this idea. It's a different way. It's like this idea of giving as opposed to taking, and yeah, I think for me, it's been quite just bringing that front of mind a lot. That's just my reflections from watching that video.
Yeah, thanks, Lockie.
I love the idea of the form of prayer having two forms, where you've got the verbal prayer that we would probably associate with prayer, and then the active form of your actions being an embodied prayer. And I think that really shifts the way you would engage in those activities. And I think part of it is this concept of being witnessed. If you're a God, and it's not a great term, but a God-fearing person, someone, or God-loving person, where you feel you're being witnessed by some other divine eye, that could probably assist with, you know, action as a form of prayer. But even without that, we are always witnessing ourselves. And I think that's what I have the trumpet call about, your self-awareness and your integrity, because we are always with ourselves. And so still, regardless of our thought about God or being witnessed, we are witnessing ourselves. And so I think that's a really beautiful way to embark on any action, is to know that it can be a form of prayer in itself. That's really cool.
It was great.
Awesome. This is a beautiful little moment here to now transition, I think, into the questions that came through on the chat and some comments from the chat. And what I'll do is I will ask the question that I have written, but then if the person who typed it would like to add anything or would actually like to kind of voice it themselves, great. But, you know, we'll take the fact that it's in the chat as okay for me to verbally ask it there. Does that sound okay? If there's anyone who really wants to ask their question themselves, then you type it away in the chat now, and I'll make sure that happens. But I think as part of
I just wanted to acknowledge as well, up a bit, it's gone now, but there was actually an offer of participation and active prayer. But I think it was Maeve offered to transcribe the entire call. So just make sure we didn't miss that offer.
Yeah.
It was really beautiful embodied prayer. Thank you for that, Maeve.
Thanks, Atlas. Yeah, I was looking at that. Go for it.
I was just going to say, I'd love to bring it into a bit of a collective dialogue, and I'd love to see everyone's faces together with the panelists and open up the floor in that way. That'd be really nice. So for those that feel comfortable doing so, bring your video back on.
Watch all of the faces enter the space. Space of faces. Hey, everyone. Hey, Alice.
Hey, everybody.
Michelle, Armin, Maeve, and Kate, Tawny,
It's great.
Maggie.
Just allow everyone to watch the panel, but it's strange being the panel watching the panel.
Panel watching the panel. Aaron.
Panel intention.
Right.
It encourages that self-obsession.
Oh, gorgeous. So from here, we've got 5 questions and also some comments that I wanted to share. Some really awesome interactions in the chat, mostly between Maggie and Ange. There's a couple of others, but yeah, definitely saw it firing off a few times. So wanted to give some time for that. And so let's kick off with some questions. The first question, and it might not always be clear who it's for, is from Alicia Lloyd. It says, thinking about where we are now in Australia's multicultural society, do you feel we are in need to regenerate community actualization? And that community would then provide more of the needs below self-actualization? Was that, Alicia, was that to anyone in particular, or is it an open question? Feels quite open to me. Open it is. Anyone go for
Can I jump in with a little comment? The first thing that comes up to me is the need to separate out the aspiration from the pathway. You know, I think aspirationally, if we could get a whole community into community actualization, it would have a tremendous effect, because everyone would be caring about each other and thinking through that perspective, and, you know, a whole lot of problems would go away. But then the question is, well, what's the way to get there? Is it by encouraging everyone to think of others, or, you know, yes. But also I think that sometimes it's underappreciated, the importance of also conquering something about self as well, you know, and that there can sometimes be a way of escaping from our own emotions, our own wantings, our own, you know, this personal stage, you know, conquering the personal stage and not attempting to skip it into the community stage. And that's an important piece of the puzzle as well on the pathway there, you know, and if we create more falseness by building up a belief of attempting to be for the community, but in reality, we have unmet needs that are pulling us around, and we're just trying to bottle them up and be that's false, and it's not listening to that quiet voice, then it's just as bad a problem.
Like a cult?
Yeah.
I think the quote, I mean, in our mimetic culture, I don't actually know whoever said anything, but I'm sure I've seen it on a meme somewhere that was attributed to Albert Einstein. But he says that a problem can't be solved by the same state of mind that created it. And so for me, that would be a really something to wave the flag for. What the question infers, that by looking out for the community, all our self requirements are taken care of. So I think that really holds true for me. I think that our bodies are far more robust than we think. Our hearts are far more open. And as far as the path towards community, it's excruciatingly easy. Like the closest thing that would connect you with someone you don't know, do that. Like your neighbor. Like after this call, I know what time of day it is, but like between the next 24 hours, if you go and say hi to your neighbor, or something that's so small, you know, we can have these big philosophic ideas of let's build community. I think it is the way forward. And I think politicians should be just helping us create our own communities, because it's the only tangible form of society we actually engage with. Otherwise, just a poetic concept of being part of a global citizenship. We can never experience that on a human level, but we can experience our neighbors. We can make food for someone, go to an old age home, or go and volunteer at prison, or I don't know, something even simpler than that. So I think that's the scary thing, is that the pathway there isn't some big philosophical ritual. It's like go and knock on a door or chat to someone, or, you know, it's really scarily close.
Yep. Absolutely. And so the question, you know, itself being, do you feel we are in need of regenerating community actualization? I think yes is a resounding yes for that. And then in terms of, would that then provide more of the needs below self-actualization? Yes. You know, if we're talking about, you're feeling a sense of self-esteem, loving and connected relationships, all of those things. Yeah, it's almost like we're looking, we would find them in places that we wouldn't think to look necessarily. I really love that. I'm going to move on to the next question. So this is from Ruth. To the person that said self-transcendence is our natural state, I think that was you, Atlas, as well. Is this evidence of the Christian concept that people are created in God's image? I think you partially spoke to this. There's another bold part here, which I think might be highlighted. How did humans evolve to think beyond survival of the fittest / animal kingdom concepts? You know, we're talking evolutionary theory. Atlas or anyone else who might have something on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to leave for the other. I referred to those two things about the natural evolution. I can speak a bit more on that, but anyone else that has anything?
Anyone else?
Well, yeah, well, I guess one of the things that kind of comes to mind, that transition for my basic knowledge around that kind of evolution was, you know, you look at some fantastic documentaries. The Largest Estate on Earth is a cool little documentary about Indigenous Australia and how that kind of evolution has kind of gone over, you know, this is like 60,000 years ago. And through in between ice ages, they can kind of document that kind of transition from basic food, water, shelter to more practicing culture. But I'm not anthropologist, but it's kind of made that transition where they had more time because they weren't in this survival mode. They were able to make spears and even cultivate land. And so there wasn't so much time spent on hunting and gathering. It actually made that transition to that kind of Homo sapien. Oh, no, sorry. It was always Homo sapien, but into this more practicing of cultural pursuits and starting to study the stars and the sun, all these different things. That was, my basic 101 of when that kind of happened.
Okay, and so self-transcendence as a natural state. It feels like what you've just spoken to there, Lockie, is if we look at Maslow's hierarchy, that there has been this progression through these various levels or stages of satisfying needs in our evolutionary process. And it's really interesting because then it does speak to maybe that there's a place for Maslow's hierarchy, but it's quite flat or kind of like single focused in terms of that journey. And we're at a stage now where there's much more to consider than just that basic evolutionary process, as you mentioned there. Let's move on from Armin to add to Ruth's question. Is it a humanocentric view to dismiss that animals aren't capable of this sense of community growth and love?
Yeah, totally.
We're very humanocentric.
I think, with the answer to do with animals not being able to think for more than themselves. That was kind of what I was referring to when I answered the question earlier, was this idea. I think it's totally humanocentric because we don't know the wisdom that is playing out through instinct, and we could never know. It's always a certain small perspective. We're all looking at the elephant in the box and we see the trunk, we see the tail, we see this, we see that, only from our perspective. And I think that nature itself, our instincts, our particular constellation of faculties, our nose, the venomous spit, and all these sort of things. It's I often think that chaos is simply a term we give to a pattern we haven't been able to see yet. There's all this interconnection. So I think it is. I 100% agree with that comment there. I think it's humanocentric to think that animals can't. I just think maybe they're not achieving it in a pattern that we can see right now. But I think they could be actually self-transcended, even though it seems like they're just being instinctual and looking after themselves. There could be actually a holistic thing at play that they are serving. And I think particularly around life and death, I think being a death doula or someone that assists people in the dying phase is a really awakening thing. And I don't see a lot of selfishness there. And in the animal kingdom as well, when they're being eaten, and there's enough nature documentaries to see this, there's a certain aspect of service in it. There's a real beautiful selflessness sometimes in that process. So they do look after themselves, but I think they also do understand how to serve. And even if it's like, the idea of praying mantises, male praying mantis having their head bitten off or whatever it is, there is a lot of service. There's also the idea of the ant colony who had a brain fungus, and it was infectious. So they picked up that one with the fungus and they walked him as far away as they could from the colony, and they all got infected, but they all died together so that it wouldn't infect everyone. So there are examples of this selflessness in the animal kingdom as well.
Beautiful. And we're getting some in the chat. We're getting, yes, my dog knows best. The birds know and they sing it to us every day. Inclined to agree. And it's about our perspective, or the way that we're viewing what community growth and love is as well. There's a human version, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the only one. Absolutely.
I'd love to know also from the panelists or the people in the group chat, because we're talking about the guru, and my cat is my guru, and the birds know when they sing every day. What is the human song or the human dance? If we were stripped back to, lined up by God, and the bird was like, well, I sing and I fly, and I do this and I do that. What is the human song or dance? What do we do?
I don't think it's an individual, unique expression of the same source in our own unique way, but it really is the same if we go back to self-transcendence being our natural state.
Well, an interesting one on that, and I might add into there's a Noongar elder called Noel Nana, and he's got this great story called carers of everything. And essentially, they literally did that. They're dreaming. For this is on Noongar Budja, Noongar dreaming, and it's actually the story around. They literally everyone during this time the Niiting. The Niiting is before anything became in existence, and everyone kind of lined up in a big circle, all the different spirits before they actualized, and they said, "What will you be known for, and what will you do?" And the last two to stay there was the Waiche, the Emu, and Noongars. And then the rest of all the animals chose humans to be, because Waiche was thick in the head and it said, pick me, blah, blah, blah. And then everyone else said, no, you're thick in the head, you're a Cartwurn, you're bad spirit. And then essentially they said, oh, humans, you're the last one left, you're the carers for everything.
I love that.
And yeah, it's an amazing story. He articulates it far better than I just did then.
No, I think
that's
that's amazing. I'd love to try and I'm taking that right in this moment as like a real thing to muse on, but that's an amazing, and I think that's, being the custodians of the land as is an Indigenous kind of concept, not the owners, not to conquer, but just to be caretakers. I think that one thing, and we do have such a capacity, like, we can heal things, we can pick things up, we can mend things, we can heal, we're also very mobile, so we can move between ecosystems. I think that's a fantastic thing, that we are the custodians, we're the caretakers of all else. And that would be such a self-transcendence in a second. Thank you.
I was reading Sand Talk again recently, which Lockie, I'm assuming you know quite a bit about. Thanks to a dear friend of mine, actually Dan and I share a mutual friend, gave it to me for my birthday. And what I really loved about that perspective and what you're saying there is that he talks about that the perspective from the Indigenous is truly that it is our obligation to care. It's not like, we could choose to do this, or why don't we do that? It's like, we have embodied this, and it is our obligation to care for the earth and for the others for generations past, present, and future. And I loved that. Just like that feels so true, no matter who you are, no matter where you came from. So thank you.
Thanks, Amber. One last question. And then we'll be wrapping up. I'll go through a few comments too, but the last question here is from Maeve, and it's about transcendence and how much transcendence can we evolve into until it becomes a form of spiritual bypassing from our basic human needs and pains. Great question, Maeve. We've got 4 minutes. Exactly, Maggie. That's a big question for 4 minutes. Hey, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Simon. I'm sorry, Ash or Simon, particularly on this. I think this might have been when you were talking about transcendence.
I mean, my reaction to this is, well, and is that a good thing or a bad thing, right? I mean, it depends whether we're transcending the false cravings of these needs, which are actually some kind of a grasping at identity or fulfillment, or, like the empty, not inner voice aspect of ourselves. And, if that's what we're transcending and that's what we're letting go of and that's what we're letting die, like, great. If on the other hand, we're using transcendence as a new, sexier, false grasping to ignore our inner voice because we're so transcendent now. We understand that the whole point is to be community oriented, but that's actually just become a loud voice on the surface that is pulling us in directions that logically make sense and is being used to justify ignoring the more difficult, quiet voice that will take us on our rite of passage, then that's a problem, but if it's the quiet voice that's taking us away from the normal needs and we transcend out, there are people that can be incredibly transcendent, happy, fulfilled, powerful humans with so little in so many different aspects of their life, any aspect of their life, physical health, wealth, safety, security. People have been fully enlightened without any of those things many times over. So they're obviously not necessary, but it needs to be genuine. And that's where this subtlety of listening to yourself comes back to for me.
There's oh, go Lockie.
No, I was just saying here.
Yeah.
It's the Zoom here.
Chogyam Trungpa talks a lot about this. He was the mentor of Pema Chodron. I don't know if anyone knows any of those people, but they're really great, and I can give the references later if anyone's interested. But Chogyam Trungpa was a really great influence on my studies around spiritual bypassing. It's a really interesting topic to me because it does become just something else. It becomes another mask that we can grab onto. It becomes something else that can distract us from what we're feeling. Again, my background from working with trauma and addiction and depression, I worked really closely with the concept of bypassing, especially spiritual bypassing in the last about 6 or 7 years as it grew and grew and grew. And it is just no different from a drug. You know, when it becomes a concept to take us away from what we really need to embrace and face and integrate, it becomes just another drug to play with, to touch on, for us to disassociate. And so I just wanted to second that. And it's large and it's at large. And again, coming back to probably all of our trumpet calls, what we talked about with that deeper connection. Yeah, sure, no worries, Ange. That deeper connection of coming back to being really honest with yourself, being in integrity, as Atlas said, and being really honest. And those self-reflections of having that radical responsibility rather than trying to, Robert Augustus Master says this wonderful line, and he talks about when the priority becomes to transcend and it takes precedent over intimacy with our pain or with what we need to integrate, spiritual bypassing is inevitable.
Wow. Thank you. That's a really poignant note to finish on. Wow. There are some comments that I'd love to just weave in before we hand over to Dan to wrap things up. So it's just occurred to me, this is from Ruth. It's just occurred to me that consumerism keeps people in the lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy. I would agree. People have their needs met, but consumerism constantly breeds an environment where people feel they aren't, so they go around in loops at the bottom, trying to meet needs that are not actually needs. That's something that's really come forward in the research and sort of the viewing of these models as well, Ruth. So thank you very much for bringing that in. This is from Maggie. When you have a state of joy, you have a far better chance of resonating with self-transcendence. When you come closer to self-mastery, you will also have joy when you are in a state of depression through self-mastery. Yeah, that's beautiful as well. And the idea of resonating with self-transcendence. From Ange, I'm finding parenting without fear tricky. Climate, social justice, rich/poor gap, etc. All things that are hard to face without feeling the fear. Very true. And hopefully after you made that comment, there was some thoughts or some ideas that have come through our conversation to really support you there, but feel free to reach out. Again, from Maggie to Ange, every age, every journey has a state of fear. Fear is a wonderful teacher to help us dismantle our concepts and to instigate new terrain. There we go. Thanks, Maggie, for feeding that back. Maggie again, wonderful to hear that depression is acknowledged as a rite of passage. The secret teachings of Indian yogis share the tantra of depression as a yogic path. It is exactly as you described. If people could be invited to learn that depression is a path on the path rather than something that is culturally shameful. If only. Beautiful. And last one again, thank you, Maggie, for your input in the chat here. May I suggest Tom Holland's latest book, Dominion, The Understanding Between Eastern and Western Ideologies, the many sharings of the basic principles of indigenous and shamanic cultures and the Western civilization. How Eastern cultures...
And Graham Hancock too.
As part of the same book or a different book?
No, he's excellent at bringing the history of Australian Indigenous tribes and giving them the honour and the respect and the airtime that they deserve in history of time. Graham Hancock's excellent at that.
Thanks, Amber. Yeah, I would agree with that one for sure. And just the final point here from Maggie was, in Eastern cultures, for many, the question is, what can I offer? And in the West, cultures ask, what can I get? Maybe both of those have a place at certain times, but yeah, we've got some more, and then we've got some thank yous. Here we go. We've got to get these in, and then I'm going to hand over. Thanks so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us. So much to take away and process from this session. That was from Stammy. From Alicia, actions are embodied prayer. So many pockets of wisdom. Also second that I would love to listen again. Oh, okay, so we're talking about a recording. We have recorded the session, so we'll get there all clear to release it. I'm definitely going to be watching it again for sure. Maggie, we are walking prayers. Wow, we are walking prayers. Again from Maggie, actually, I've been living in community for 30 years. We are presently in deep crisis, and it's a wonderful challenge to engage in self-actualization in a new form. And also we go through many cycles together. So this sharing has been profoundly helpful to see and hear your thoughts and ideas. Thank you. And then a couple from Tawny here. Tawny with some info nuggets. There's a lot of research happening now within the realms of more than human worlds, multidisciplinary anthropologists, ecologists, current work with the Marind people in West Papa. And look up Dr. Sophie Chow. She's doing some incredible research and activism for the Marind community. All right, there will be more. We'll definitely do a bit of a capture and a synthesis of everything that we've discussed. But for now, I feel like we almost need another breath, but I know we're short on time, so I'm going to hand over to Daniel to wrap things up. Thank you so much for tuning in. To the panelists, let's just do a wave of the hands as a Zoom version of a clap. Awesome stuff. Thank you very, very much. Dan, over to you.
We will do a collective breath at the very end there, just to allow all of what's just been shared to sink in for us in a little bit of silence. I just want to share a few things, and like what was coming through there was the crux of it seemed as though, you know, what we're facing individually and potentially collectively, at least in the Western world, is somewhat of a mistaken identity, and we seem to have taken ourselves for what is or tends to be a lot of that noise in our mind, Ash, that you were speaking to, and the narratives that are running, and our surrounding environments tend to feed that and tend to have us feel as though, hey, maybe my survival is at threat. And not only has there been a mistaken identity, but the bandwidth of our identity. So not just that not being our identity, but the bandwidth of our identity, that, you know, what is true, and not only here in the location that each and every one of us sits in, but also how that spills over and is not separate from, you know, the relationships that we have, from the most intimate relationships to the neighbor, to the person we might be buying coffee from, or the people we get our food from, our relationship with the land, and our relationship with the work that we do in the world. And so, so many gems coming through from our panelists there. Thank you so much. If we've got just letting you guys know of a course that we have coming up, and the name of the course is Listen. I'm not going to speak to it too much because we have an info night at 6 p.m. on a Thursday next week. So it's an hour info night so that we can go into depth there. To put it simply, the course is structured in a way where the first thing that we focus on is personal sovereignty, how to manage our thought states and emotions, you know, and so that we can not negate those or you know, suppress those, but simply, as Amber was speaking to, learn to be in full watchfulness of that which is arising, and to better discern what is true. And when we're able to do that, then it places us in the best possible position and perspective to be able to truly hear and listen what is being delivered by not only humans that we're speaking to, but situations in the land and so on. So anyone that wants to know any more about that, we genuinely recommend you come to the info night. We'll shoot you an email in regards to the link for that. That's next Thursday. We will be sharing the work of the panelists for those that want to share their work. There's so much beautiful work being done by each and every one of our panelists. So we'll share that as well. We had an integration activity, and because we kind of thought we would go with the flow and say yes and to all of the beautiful sharings that were happening, we just allowed the conversation to continue on. However, we also, it's nice. This experience has been beautiful and incredibly rich, and we would love it to be much more than a simple moment that's lasted 2 hours and 15 minutes online. And so at the very least, if everyone could grab a pen and paper and write these 3 things down and just ask themselves these 3 questions beyond this session here. And it's what, so what, now what? The first one with what has landed for you? What stuck with you from all of the gems that was shared? What's been an aha moment for you personally here? And then, so what? So what does that mean for you specifically in your life? What does that look like for you specifically in your life? How is that playing out for you specifically in your life? Or in the world, or sphere around you that you have positive influence on? And then now what? So now what can you do differently? What might you do differently? What is it in your day-to-day, in a real pragmatic, practical terms, that given the insights and what has landed for you today, what is it that you could do differently to integrate the insights that have occurred? Lockie speaks to this a lot, and we just went through a bit of a transformation in that 2-hour period. So now to honor, there's been the thank yous and honor everyone that showed up today, and to turn this into action and activity in our day-to-day. And the action and activity may be stillness. We're speaking about noise and then noise versus signal being that which could be true. So the action could very well be stillness. And in what form will stillness happen for each of us? So nice little integration there, and we will share all of the chat. There'll be a follow-up email. And if we could take a moment now to sit in that stillness. We've done our Zoom waves and thank yous and goodbyes. If we could spend a moment, a minute at the very least, to sit here and allow what has been shared to simply sink in. There's no needing to try and hold on to, oh, I hope I remember that. I hope I remember this. That which needed to land for each and every one of us has definitely landed there if we open ourselves up to that. So we just take a moment now and allow that to sink in for us. And taking one last breath in on this call. Gently opening your eyes. We look to see each and every one of you and more in 2 months' time, in December. We'll be doing another one of these. So looking forward to seeing all of your faces. Have a beautiful evening, beautiful morning, beautiful day, and thank you to everyone.